Boardroom Bound, Episode 77, Uncovering the Secrets of Universal Boardroom Success with TK and Kerrie Kerstetter.
Our challenge to them is almost tell us what a boardroom should be like in the future. I mean, what things to you don't make sense that have been traditions for years and years and years?
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give aspiring and existing directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder, you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. And in today's episode, we have a special double guest. This is a Father's Day episode. It's a first for me, and I'm thrilled about it. So I have TK and Kerrie Kerstetter joining. And you have probably seen TK if you follow the boardroom space. He's been around for a while as a leading figure educating people about the boardroom. And one of the reasons you've seen him and know about him is because of what his daughter has always done behind the scenes in terms of building the brand and the reputation, getting it out there in a very smart way. I'm thrilled to bring them together to talk about their story, about how they built the organization, what they're doing now, partnering with Diligent and really growing into an international presence, but also having great fun along the way in a wonderful story about dad and daughter working together. And you can tell very clearly TK is very proud of what Kerrie has done, and you can tell from Kerrie's journey that she's really enjoyed working with her father. Let's jump into the show.
Well, thanks, Alexander. It's a pleasure to be here.
So this is only the second time we've ever had a three-way conversation, and this is a very different one. The last time that was a couple. This time we have a father and daughter, which is a perfect, wonderful segment for our special Father's Day episodes. I'm thrilled about that, and a wonderful way to do it when you think about people that know people in the boardroom space that are involved in the nuts and bolts of making it happen. Also, a professional person who interviews someone along those lines. So I couldn't be more thrilled about what we're practicing here today. But before we get into all the fun of this episode, I just like to set the scene for our audience to understand where we're coming from. So TK, I'm sure many of our people have seen you in the weekly web show that you provide and have been doing for so many years, and that great content that is coming out. But let's just start with a bit of a background experience. So before you got into this space, you had about a 20-year career in financial services. You were a president and director of a large organization, a few $1 billion, and then from there you moved on. Why don't we start back at the beginning? What was that like when you were just the president and director, and what had you get the idea to move across and go into the board education space?
Well, it wasn't by my own doing, actually. We were a mutual bank that had gone public, and we actually had an activist in that conversion because they didn't have rules then come into the stock. And they wanted to do the traditional flip of when a company moves, particularly a financial company like a bank, flips from mutual to stock. They have unlimited ability to buy as much stock as they want if they're a depositor. And then subsequently, their wish was to flip it because usually there's a nice increase when the bank goes public. And so we quickly found ourselves in a contested proxy battle for the bank, at which point we had voted some shares wrong, and the next thing I knew, there were dissonants on the board, and literally all hell broke loose. So in the course of all that, there was a change of control, and I had just an amazing lesson at a very young age about shareholders and investors and all the legal responsibilities that a board has. And when we were all done with the experience, I ended up leaving the bank, and I wrote a monograph for the NYSE at the time called The 10 Commandments for Bank Directors, What Regulators Won't Publish. And actually, it was a very successful monograph that the NYSE was happy about, and it got me into the business of So I started the Bank Director Training Center after that, and that was my entree into the board education world.
And that quickly grew. So that was about 14 years or so. And then next thing you know, New York Stock Exchange is knocking on your door, right?
Yeah, when my big step was Bill Seidman was a partner with Bank Director Magazine, and they had called me and asked me to do some programs using my programs in their reach. And we worked together for a little bit, and the next thing you know, I was given an offer to move to Nashville, incorporate my little education business into the magazine. And then I was asked to be president and CEO of Bank Director. From Bank Director, we started corporate board member. And then, as you say, we then got an offer from the New York Stock Exchange. Although they weren't interested in both, they were interested in corporate board member and said they wouldn't do the deal unless I came along with the corporate board member part, which I did.
And so you were at the New York Stock Exchange doing the weekly show, which had a little different title, right? It was This Week in the Boardroom when it first started. And that was about 4 years or so until you then launched Boardroom Resources?
Yeah, I went to the exchange as chairman of NYSE Governance Services. And actually, we were doing the show with them before we were acquired. I think that's one of the reasons that sort of made us attractive. And then when I left the New York Stock Exchange, when they got acquired by ICE, I couldn't take the name with me because they had purchased that. So that gave birth to Inside America's Boardrooms. And interestingly enough, the first place that we took the show to, the new show, was NASDAQ. So I sort of covered the ground with both exchanges during my career.
And that wasn't the only change that happened, because after you'd been doing that for a few years, now there's an opportunity where you're working together with Diligent, one of the leading sort of board technology companies that I would think of.
Yeah, and that has been a terrific experience for many reasons. You'll understand when I left the exchange and Kerrie joined me that she sort of took our business to the next level in the communications and social media, which, as you know, with your show, is a very critical part of anybody that's sort of venturing into this type of business. But yeah, Diligent had reached out, was very impressed with our content at the time, and ultimately bought Boardroom Resources and the show Inside America's Boardrooms at the close of 2017. So subsequently, they have had me start Inside Europe's Boardrooms and Inside Australia's Boardrooms, and it has just been a fascinating experience for me going around the world and sort of replicating what I did and building the brand in the U.S.
Well, Diligent is definitely a force around the world. I know Dottie Schindlinger and I talk on a somewhat regular basis, and she's usually somewhere in the world, whether it's promoting their latest book or something else going on. And she's on the conference next week that I'll be listening to. So it is a small world after all, how easy it is to get around. And Kerrie, I would love to bring you into the conversation at this point. So growing up, you were seeing what was happening with your dad. You're watching some of these experiences. And I'd love to hear your take on that. And partly as you were going through school, right, learning about journalism, public relations, communications, your bachelor's, your master's, and then the opportunity came across to work with your dad and learning a lot more about the board space. What was that like for you? How did you get interested in it? You're clearly very involved in the board space at a much younger age than most people are.
Yeah, and I think it'll take us a little less time to go through my resume here. I, as you said, got education in the journalism and marketing space. Even went on to grad school. I was in journalism at a very interesting time where everything was changing. So I often took that skill set to the marketing and PR side. And in grad school, my grad thesis was looking at how companies were using social media to build relationships. So kind of took an interest in the corporate side kind of early on in my education. And if you're wondering how interested I was growing up and what my dad was doing, the answer is not at all. It was it was the kind of thing where you just got your you got down to your one-liner when someone asked what your dad did, and no one really understood what mine meant, in class. So, I really didn't have a lot of exposure to the board space until, later when I was a working professional. I was at a creative agency, a digital marketing agency down in Dallas, heading a content and social media arm. It was a great experience, and while I was there, my dad happened to be starting up a business in my space. And so it was my obligation as a daughter to, of course, ensure that he was setting up the strategy correctly and setting it up for success. So I became involved in the business side, just getting the digital side up. Of course, he was launching this brand new show, this brand new format, which I'm sure you're familiar, requires building an audience from scratch, which is a really difficult task, even when you have a broad network. So that's kind of where I came in to think through all the ways in which we'd be building up this audience, reaching, extending our content to people. And I told him at one point that I would help him out. I ended up kind of outgrowing my existing role at the agency, that I'd help him out just for a few months and then find someone to fill my spot. And what happened was I ended up being so much more interested in the space than I anticipated. Corporate governance is obviously not the kind of job you brag about at brunch with your girlfriends. It just doesn't get a lot of interest. So on its face, again, really didn't know that there was so much going on. And I think, what today's companies and boards are dealing with is everything that's impacting, our society, our global economy, the future of our workforce. And I was just fascinated that, boards were talking about digital transformation and about diversity. And, I was fascinated by this evolving dynamic between institutional investors and companies. And so, to be honest, I just kind of got sucked in. And I, at one point, went back to him and I said, okay, fine, I'm in. Let's do this. Let's grow this. I just saw a really unique opportunity. So that was the backstory.
And not so short.
Yeah, not so short. Maybe that was a longer journey than I was.
Well, and I'd love for you to give a little bit more color to your audience. I think you sold it short. You're talking about building an audience from scratch. And clearly this is a big brand and a big reputation, a big following, phenomenal guests. We were talking about that before the show started. There's lots of synergies between us, but you sort of have many of the best on the show. A lot of the things that we talk about in the show often come back to some networking in many ways. People need to figure out how you get out there. How do you build a reputation? You become a person of authority and get that out there and understood. Give us a little more context. What did you actually do to build an audience for the show?
Well, part of it is, remember, I had the advantage of having a previous show, and having the linkage to NYSE companies and also Corporate Board Member Magazine. I mean, I had a lot of touches out there in this space. So I think what I didn't have was I didn't have any of the knowledge about how to translate that into the social media world, and that's when I turned to Kerrie and said, "Geez, how do we do that?"
Yeah, and I think the takeaway there is, we built an audience. It's the same as networking, one interaction at a time, and it's being really thoughtful about. We were a two-man company. We had limited resources, and so if we had a really excellent interview with a guest, how could we push that out not once, but take all those insights and focus on different aspects of the episode and push them out in several different ways. And so it led us to some digital marketing platforms that haven't been historically used in the boards and media space at the time, which was a lot of social media. We developed these email newsletter formats that looked across the industry and gave you kind of the highlights, what happened in corporate governance last week, and it gave someone the ability to consume right there in the email or dig in for more information. We would excerpt clips, short 1 to 2 minute clips of particularly compelling insights that were shared, and then we would share those on social media. And then, a lot of involvement in events of our partners, our knowledge partners. So it was one of those things where, digital marketing is a lot about creating those interactions, and ensuring that when someone comes across your your content, that they come away with something valuable, and that's what leads to a lifelong listener.
And clearly that has been successful. But if I take a slight deviation from the story where we're going today, this is a Father's Day episode. So I'd love for both of you to be able to talk about it. I'm sure there are some people out there, and I have 2 young daughters myself. I'm sure in some ways it'd be easy to glamorize. Wouldn't it be great to work with your kids someday? I'm sure it's not all walking on clouds and sunshine. But Kerrie did talk about it's just going to be a few months, which has grown into more than a few years. So clearly it was a successful partnership. Was there any trepidation about getting into business as a family? Anything, lessons learned you'd pass across to others in our audience?
I'll let you go first, Kerrie.
I mean, doesn't everyone want to work with their dad when they grow up? Again, it was certainly not anything that I had in mind. And there was, of course, some concerns about how this would work between us, right? A 2-man company, kind of ongoing. Just the 2 of us. What would that be like? I would say what made this partnership work particularly well was also probably our biggest challenge, which is we are very similar personality-wise. We think the same. Often come up with a lot of big creative ideas. We like that kind of disruptive thinking. We like trying new formats. So that made the development of the company itself kind of an easy one for us to agree on and align on, that we were coming into the board space, kind of launching this media platform that there really wasn't anything out there like it. And then you can imagine, with big ideas and creativity comes a little bit of stubbornness and headstrongness. So there was at times when, we would have very constructive debates on what was the right way to grow it and whether or not we needed to invest in certain things like a new website. So I will give TK a lot of credit for being incredibly open-minded, especially on the experience areas that I brought to the table. And then the last thing I'll just say is there was I quickly had to work out, and this is just something that no one would think about, but a if-then statement in my head, which said if I was talking about work, Dad was then TK. And so if I was at home talking with my family, I could call him Dad. So I really quickly developed this rule in my head to avoid calling him Dad on a conference call. So little things like that had to work out at the beginning. But I think we certainly got to the point where we were operating quite smoothly together.
And I would say I would agree with everything she said. We did butt heads in the beginning, and I had to accept that I didn't know very much about the social media expansion, and she had to accept that she has never served as a board member in a boardroom. So we slowly taught each other as much as we could about what each of us knew. And I was nervous about it. I actually at the time did not want to take on a real life employee. I didn't want to fill out any of the forms or do any of the stuff that had to be. Yet, and I'll credit my wife with it, my wife said, look at what she's done in a couple of months. You'd be foolish to let that resource go, try and bring in somebody new, have a 50-50 chance that worked out when you have a good formula. And then she said, how many people, if dads are saying anything at the end of their career, it's I wish I would have spent less time at work and more time with the kids. And to be in the position, at least with one daughter, that that had this amazing experience of having a chance to build a brand with somebody who really enjoys building a brand. So it was like a project for us, like a family project. We even got the rest of the family involved at times when we needed their help. And one of the things that's interesting, Alexander, when Brian Stafford, who's the CEO of Diligence, first sort of inquired, I sort of held it off a little bit. I didn't know whether we would want to relinquish that flexibility that we had. And said he was very interested in both of us as a team at the time. And then it got back to me after this transaction was completed that the diligence was more interested in Kerrie's skill set than they were in mine. Okay, which I tend to believe now after a couple of years that may have actually been the truth. So anyway, it's been an amazing experience. We still get to work together, although not quite as close as we had when it was just the two of us, but it's still very rewarding. And I think a lot of people within Diligent, people we work with, look at us and say, wow, I wish I could have that experience with my kids. So on a Father's Day show, I'm just extremely proud, to be able to say that we were able to do this and do it together.
That's very clear. I can feel the proudness coming through my microphone. I'm reminded of one of my professors back at Wharton who has a method called Total Leadership, and that's his book. And he talks about in life how there are basically 4 different spheres. And you can imagine them as circles. And if you can get those to overlap, life is better. So it's like work, family, home, life, that sort of stuff. And the more you can get them to come together, the better off you are, because you're spending your time and efforts alignment. And what you've done here is you brought family and work together, right? And so work's where we spend most of our time. So that does sound ideal, and that sounds wonderful. But I'm also thinking back to conversations I've had with Dottie Schindlinger of, if we just talk podcasts for a minute, there's at least 700,000 in the world. And when I started this, I think there were 2 or 3 others. There might be 10 now. But you think about how little education there is for these incredibly important positions. Directors need all this training and information, so it's very easy to see why your weekly web show is adding so much value to so many people. But that's not all you've done. I mean, we've talked through so much about already, TK, your history and what you've grown and developed from the magazines and the shows. But I know there's something else, and Kerrie, I know this is a big point of pride for you as well, was the next gen board leadership that you guys figured out and developed. And Kerrie, I imagine it's something that was easier for you to relate to when you're talking about, I didn't really know what my dad did, didn't really care, didn't really explain it to people too well, and they didn't get it. But this was more on your level. I'd love if you could tell us more about this and how it came about.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. This is, I don't want to speak for TK, but this has definitely been my favorite project that I've started since entering the space. This is a unique group of people. It's a burgeoning cohort in the boardroom. It's a group of public company directors predominantly in their 30s and 40s. And we started coming across these members kind of one at a time. And we would connect with some of these board members, and we would kind of get the sense that they were facing some real challenges coming into the boardroom. Many of them were working professionals and recruited for very specific kind of digital skill sets often. And yet they were kind of all alone. A lot of them had never met a board member within 20 years of their age. So we kind of quickly formed a community with a couple goals. One, to, of course, connect these directors with one another. There was not a community at the time where they could have a forum to talk about some of these challenges and share experiences. The second was obviously to learn from them. They were representative, really, of where the next generation of board members was coming from, and they had fascinating ideas, right? Different approaches to problems in the boardroom, and so it was very interesting to hear them think through some of these, typical challenges from just an entirely different angle. And I think within that, we really wanted to tackle some big, hairy challenges. There's a lot of discussions in the boardroom, around ESG and diversity and, models of board governance changing to be, more strategic. And so there was a lot going on at the time that we felt like this group had a unique perspective on. So that was really our motivation for getting them together. I think we, on our first meeting, were very unsure about how this would be received. And it was, resounding feedback from them that this was the most valuable board experience that they had, ever participated in. And they begged us to, continue on. And at that point, we were still a two-man company and looking at each other saying, how on earth are we going to fit this into our crazy schedule and resource this? But it's always been something we've prioritized. I think we're going on 3 years. This group has met meets a couple times a year. We've even switched to virtual format after the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, this group just continues to kind of meet, often under Chatham House rules, but we do our best to kind of share out these takeaways because I think the conversations that they're having are important ones.
Yeah, just to add something, this is probably, for me as well, been the most interesting project that I've ever been involved in. And again, I've been involved over the 25 years of being in this space on a lot of things. The fascination of sitting in a room with 15 new directors, all who are extremely receptive to what you have to say from your experiences so they can translate and put the best of those experiences into being as effective as director as they can be. And then me having the opportunity to learn from them about how they think about corporate life in the world. And then being able to bond with this set, it's just amazing experience. We had the help of Spencer Stewart, Julie Dom and her team, and Wilson Cincini's corporate law firm, and Diligent, all who have played a role as a team along with Kerrie and I to make this happen. And just during COVID, we've already run 3 sessions about for board members that they can take back to their separate boardrooms and offer advice. So it just shows, if you really think it through and see all the avenues of where you can help a board be more effective, that it's almost endless. And but the secret is, plan it out, carry it through, and once you get a following, it's just fascinating, actually.
It's interesting just reflecting on that myself and thinking back to my first board role when I was in my early 30s, first major board role. And it was a pale male stale organization. And by at least 20 years, I was the most junior person in the room. And then just by definition of that, I brought diverse thinking. And it was fascinating realizing I had to translate everything I thought into a way that would be reflective to them. And having that sort of cohort to bounce ideas off of is brilliant. So I love what you're doing there. But it probably, even TK, picking up on what you're talking about, it expands the conversation in the way that we can think about for the future of the boardroom. Kerrie, you were sort of teasing it out there. They think in different ways. It's probably giving you guys a chance to step back and reflect on what changes you probably see coming in the future of boards. Maybe you can expand upon what you're just saying there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, our challenge to them is almost tell us what a boardroom should be like in the future. I mean, what things to you don't make sense that have been traditions for years and years and years? And if you look at what's come out of COVID and, the demonstrations recently and ESG and everything, there is no question that the boardroom of the future is not going to look like it does today. And so with this very, bright group of people, and when I'm talking, these people sit on boards, and, we have directors in their 30s that sit on boards like Coca-Cola and, Campbell Soup, and, large traditional organizations. And yet they shouldn't, they should let their minds wander and say, okay, what doesn't make sense to you in the boardroom? What should you be spending time on? Because obviously they'll found out very quickly that their time is limited. So just having that dialogue and being able for us to push out some other thoughts and content related to this is almost a blessing.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that by saying I think we've never pitched them a discussion topic that we have the answers for, and so it's always around, as everything continues to evolve, what's the board's role in innovation? What's the board's role in overseeing culture? How does director onboarding need to change to reflect the fact that the majority of directors now have never been in a public boardroom before? So I think we're getting, looking ahead in a lot of these discussions and getting a lot of interesting perspectives about perhaps what all boards should be thinking about around these topics.
But related to that, if we extrapolate, I'm sure there's on the flip side there, you're hearing concerns or ideas are coming up that you wonder about the future of corporate directors and the boardrooms on sort of the negative side of these are things we have to overcome. And TK, you're sort of teasing a bit there, but I'm sure our audience would love to hear in more depth on some of those topics.
Well, there's things I'm concerned about. I think this movement for having a purpose, a corporate purpose and whatever. I mean, there's obviously positive aspects of this and aspects that I've been supporting, like diversity, for a long time. At the same time, I just wonder when push comes to shove, when pension funds have to make sure that they are producing the best return that they can for their employees, and when a company is all of a sudden not doing well financially, I'm just having trouble getting away that shareholder centric or performance centric isn't going to still bubble up to the top, and we've got to make sure that everything that we're doing in these other related areas still translates back to performance. Okay. And so that's one thing. The other thing is I don't know how, with what's gone on with the video conferencing and the virtual board meetings, I see the boardroom changing where, and this is sort of sadly, but I see it changing where things are probably going to be more remote. The fact that you're going to, especially with banks, bring people in on a monthly basis, probably is going to change, and more of that is going to be done virtually. You're still going to, everybody I talk to still wants to have X number of face-to-face, because you want to see body language, you want to see that happen. So, that's another thing that I think is, certainly in the horizon on that side. So, I'm just hoping that these things do sort themselves out on, what's best, because we don't want to see this get to the point where people don't want to take their companies public, okay, because of the hassles or the restrictions that are associated with it. We want to keep those capital markets such that should be a dream of, all companies to grow and be able to go public and get that investment opportunity out to the public. So, those are just some concerns in it. And, I'm in the golden years of my time on this space. And so, I'll stay engaged as long as I enjoy it. And right now, I don't see any reason I'm actually having the time of my career. But all those things are issues that I think have to be sorted out, Alexander.
Yeah, I would agree. I think what concerns me most, and I think this is probably reflected among some of our next-gen cohort as well, is just the pace of change in the boardroom. Boards aren't historically lauded for being, ahead of the curve, and I think especially with important issues like board diversity, and I mean diversity of all kinds. We've seen efforts that have extended several decades back and really only marginal progress. And I think that's one of the things where, you just hope that we can get to a place that we're driving change faster than we have. And I think one observance on my end is I think COVID-19 has dealt everyone an incredibly interesting challenge. And I think boards have accomplished more change in the last 3 months than they probably ever thought possible, just in terms of adapting their, meeting formats and governance models, information models. So I'm hoping that ends up serving as a catalyst, a window into, this idea that boards do have the ability to adapt on a kind of a quicker scale than they may have originally thought possible, and hopefully we can kind of apply that pace of change into other areas.
It's interesting you say that, Kerrie, because the conversations that I'm having with public company directors are saying exactly that. And one example would be someone who serves on several high-profile company boards like Home Depot is saying that one of his companies has decided we need to change how we do it, and we're going to start it now. So they meet every month instead of, say, 4 times a year face-to-face. So they're meeting every month, and it's going to be a combination. Some are just an hour-long Zoom meeting. They still want to get together face-to-face for sure, but they've said instead of having 4 quarterlies, why don't we do the 2 big normal ones where we have the dinner the night before, you get to check in, have a lot of time with people, but we want to make sure we're seeing more regularly, but also we know we can cut down the time and the money that we spend on all of these by changing the formats, and we can do the other 2 quarterly ones we will do just as a 4-hour video conference so that we do have a length of time. So I know organizations are playing with it, so it's exciting to see how it's going to shake out, and a lot of it's up in the air, but I think what you've talked about is we know things are going to be different for a lot of reasons. Having younger people on the board, more diverse thought is a great thing, and I'm just amazed the time has flown by today, but I know we started with TK and we began with your career and where you've gone, but this is a special Father's Day episode. So Kerrie, I'd like you to have the last word today, and I'm wondering whether there's anything that you'd love to say to your dad on this special Father's Day.
Well, thank you for the last word. Alex, really appreciate you having us on. And no, I'm thrilled that this is a Father's Day edition. Father's Day is obviously an opportunity to kind of step back and take a look at the impact that our fathers and father figures have in our lives. And I think, again, reflecting back on our experience, particularly over the last 5 years, I've had the incredible privilege of getting to extend that time with my dad and the impact of that, not only into my professional development, but just getting the sheer benefit of spending that much more time together. So that is something that I would never trade, and just so thankful that I've had the opportunity to work with you and hope it continues.
Well, to you and to Kyla, who is my youngest daughter, who I'm very proud got her doctorate in physical therapy and is at the George Washington University Hospital. But to both girls and an amazing wife, I'm blessed. And Alexander, I want to wish you the best of luck. I know how, again, you've afforded me to be on the guest side versus the question asking side. And I know how challenging it is with the number that you do, but I wish you the best of luck with your show, and hopefully together we can make a dent in making boards more effective.
Well, it was a pleasure having you both on today, and I usually don't get to close by thanking 2 people, but TK and Kerrie, it was a pleasure having you with us today, and thank you for sharing your insights and helping all of us to be boardroom bound.
Thanks.
Our pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with both TK and Kerrie Kerstetter. As a proud father of 2 young girls, really excited that TK got to experience that moment talking about how he's worked closely with Kerrie, and of course he has a shout out to his other daughter at the end. So it's wonderful to hear not only a special day that we get to celebrate, but why we're celebrating. This is an organization that has done great stuff, and if you're not familiar with their work, I highly recommend you start listening right away. Fantastic insights, and that's what this show is all about, helping give you the right resources to grow and develop. This is another one you're going to want to stay connected with. And of course, if you head over to podcast.gordon.edu, you will find links to the many resources that we talked about today. Now, please know that the Boardroom Bound team and I are so proud to be your go-to podcast for all things that connect, prepare, and empower you to land a board seat. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any of the high-quality content that we're bringing to you every Wednesday. Thanks for joining me today. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be Boardroom Bound.